Hello everybody and welcome back to Red Eagle Politics. Make sure you guys like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So, tomorrow we have a big day. I will not be streaming because I'll be out of town giving a speech, but I still wanted to cover this and make my final predictions for the 2023 off-year election cycle. 2022 was a major disappointment, and Republicans have been in quite an election drought. However, they have a very good chance of turning things around and possibly winning some competitive races. We have the Mississippi gubernatorial election, we have the Kentucky gubernatorial election, and on top of that, we have a very important state legislative election taking place in Virginia, which could give Glenn Youngkin a trifecta to work with to make the state actually pass more conservative, solid legislation that needs to be passed, terraform the state, etc. There's also a couple other elections scattered across the country, and we're going to be making our final predictions in this video. We haven't talked about Mississippi in a while. Tate Reeves was originally considered vulnerable because he's not popular, but still his approval rating is above water. It's rebounded since last year somewhat. And also, you look at the Democrat candidate, Brandon Presley, he's running this fake moderate campaign that I don't necessarily believe is going to end up working. Republicans are still going to be voting for Tate Reeves by and large, and Mississippi is a state that is incredibly polarized. You're likely going to see black turnout be down a little bit, and judging from what we saw in Louisiana with Landry's overperformance, I think that Reeves is going to be okay. You could look at some of the polls here in the general election. Pretty much all of them, in fact, all of the polls recently taken have Reeves up. Some of them have Reeves up by more than 5 points, even more than 10 points. And on top of that, he's above 50% in multiple polls, which is not a good sign for Brandon Presley. You could look back at 2019 when he faced a statewide official and he was not an incumbent. He won by roughly 5.1 percentage points. I think he's going to win by around that. I'm going to clock him in at 5.2. It's possible he could win by more. It's possible he could win by less, but I expect him to win by around 5 points or so when it's all said and done. So now we're going to be moving on to the state of Virginia, and then we'll wrap it up with Kentucky because that one is becoming closer and closer, it seems. But does Cameron have enough momentum to overcome the original deficit? That's the real question. But nevertheless, Virginia, in 2021, Republicans went out there and they flipped the state house and they had a 4-seat majority. I think they're going to hold their majority. I really do. And I think they're going to hold it by 1 or 2 seats. I really think that you look at the candidates Democrats are running in competitive districts, and you also look at the early votes so far, technically not 100% accurate by modeled party, but still Target Smart does do its best, and what it does show is that Republicans, they are in a deficit to the Democrats in the early vote by just 18 points and change. They were in the deficit in 2022 by more than that. They were in the deficit by like 25. So you're seeing a little bit of a shift in Republicans' attitudes toward early voting. That's a good thing. If they have a decent election day showing, I think they'll flip enough districts to hold the House. And on top of that, rural voters are coming out stronger in the early vote despite there being fewer rural early voting sites, which does tell you that Republicans are likely energized in this race. So when it comes down to the Virginia State Senate, this one was on a knife's edge. Democrats in 2019, they went out there and they flipped the chamber, but they only have it by a few seats. It's 21-19. It was 21-19 Republican before. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to come down to the wire. I think it's likely going to come down to one district or two. And I do believe that Republicans are going to take the state Senate off of a technicality. I think you're going to have it 20-20. There's going to be a little chaos. It'll be tied. And then the lieutenant governor, Winsome Sears, is going to go out there and break the ties. That's probably what's going to happen, in my view, for Virginia there. I think Republicans are technically going to have both chambers. They'll have their trifecta, but it's going to be on a razor-thin edge. So there's going to be a couple powerful members of each chamber, the more, swingy voters for sure, the swingy representatives or state senators there. But either way, I think you're going to see positive results out of Virginia, positive results out of Mississippi, and you'll probably see some negative results, and I'm going to get to my final predictions on the races scattered across the country that aren't being talked about a lot nonetheless. But still, we have to look at Kentucky. We have to look at the big one because Democrats won it in 2019, and they won it very narrowly, by the way. Andy Beshear, he won by less than half a point. And turnout compared to presidential elections are lower in these things. Democrats capitalized on the Matt Bevin hate, and they ran somebody who was the son of a former governor, and he ended up winning. Fake moderate Andy Beshear. Daniel Cameron hasn't been running the most inspirational campaign, and Beshear has a solidly, surprisingly high approval rating, and I think that on the surface level would be enough to bring him to victory. But Cameron has been going out there lately, and he has been making up some ground. He is a statewide elected official. This is also probably going to be viewed as an election that's like a Trump proxy war type thing because Trump endorsed Cameron in the primary. Cameron outperformed polling in the primary, which, take that information, if you will, and apply it to the general. Sometimes it does carry over in terms of the polling errors, but nonetheless, DeSantis endorsed Kelly Craft out of nowhere. She was never going to win. She came in third place. Don't know why he did that. Maybe for donor money because her family is basically a part of a network of wealthy donors. But still, Cameron won, and Cameron's going out there, and he is probably the only candidate that is endorsed by Trump in this election cycle that could lose. And if he loses, is it Trump's fault? No. I mean, Trump may have been able to help him more if he went down there, did a campaign rally, but nonetheless, this would have everything to do with Daniel Cameron, the campaign he's decided to run. And as a result, it's kind of been a little lackluster, but still, nevertheless, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to rule him out. There was a recent Emerson College poll that came out that showed him making up a 16-point deficit. And when they applied the leaners to the poll, Daniel Cameron was actually ahead very narrowly in the Emerson poll. So that needs to be taken into account. And you look at this and you see it. Yeah, he's gaining. And you look at the fact that they applied the leaners and it put Cameron ahead. And this is what is going on right here. This is a very close race, and polls are not entirely 100% accurate all the time, especially as you get closer to Election Day and you have people voting early. But the early vote shows it to be pretty good for Daniel Cameron overall. I mean, you're looking at this. This is the early and mail, not just in-person early voting, but also mail-in votes. And keep in mind, Kentucky has a close amount of registered Democrats to registered Republicans. You have ancestral Democrats who typically vote Republican, and Republicans overtook Democrats in party registry last year to the point where it's like that margin is not exactly good for Beshear. Beshear's probably going to get a decent amount of those ancestral Dems in the state of Kentucky who may be voting Republican down ballot. That is true. They may approve of him, and that needs to be taken into account. But still, I would anticipate that a lot of the people that are voting Republican, or at least that have their party registered as Republican, are probably not going to be voting for Beshear. And you also have to understand the early vote has looked far better this time around than it did for Republicans back in 2019. And yeah, party registries have swung more in the Republicans' direction, and that's true, and that should be taken into account. But nevertheless, Republicans have been growing increasingly averse to early voting, so it's possible that an upset does happen. It just depends what percentage of Republicans or people that identify as Republicans in party ID end up going out there and voting for Andy Beshear, because if that number is anywhere near like 15 to 20, kind of how it was back in 2019, I think Beshear probably narrowly ends up prevailing. But it depends what happens on Election Day. If you have a very good showing, I think Republicans could end up picking this off, and it would be a great night if they were. But I guess I'm not ready to predict that for some reason. Maybe it's just getting burned one too many times. I want the voters of Kentucky to prove me wrong. I think it's going to be a nail-biter. I'll predict Beshear to win it by less than a point. That is my current prediction just because of the early vote. But there's a lot we don't know. We don't know exactly who's voting, what percentage of registered Dems vote Dem, what percentage of registered Republicans end up voting Republican. There's so many questions that haven't been answered. What's the turnout looking like on election day? All of these things matter, and we will see what happens when it's all said and done. But here is my final slate of final predictions. So for Pennsylvania Supreme Court race, I think the Democrats are probably going to end up winning it. I think they're going to win it by maybe 4 to 6 points, possibly by more, looking at what we saw out of Wisconsin, just because of the fact that Democrats for these court races have been really hammering the abortion talking points, and Republicans haven't been able to effectively counter them on that. So I think that, especially without Trump on the ballot in Pennsylvania, Democrats probably pulled that, even though their state party is in trouble too, recent trouble, and we know that. But we'll see what happens in that race. New Jersey state legislature, that's up for grabs too. I think both will go blue, but Republicans are doing well in the early vote, so watch the margins in some of these seats. But nevertheless, I think our hero Ed Durr, who ran a campaign with like $43 and ended up knocking off the former leader of the state house there in the state of New Jersey. I don't even know if he expected to win. He won in 2021 basically out of nowhere. It was epic, but still I do believe that he'll go down because he's being outspent vastly once again, and he's not going to have the top of the ticket to carry him over. In Ohio, there's going to be ballot referendums on abortion, and sadly, I do expect them to pass in the Democrats' favor, in the liberal favor. I do believe the margin's going to be less than the August campaign, where it was more of a confusing question, lower turnout overall among conservatives in the state. But I would expect yes to pass, sadly. I don't think it's going to pass by like 15 points, but I do think it'll pass by a 5 to 10 point margin or so, depending on the referendum. In Virginia, I think the state house, like I said, it's on a knife's edge regardless. I think Republicans hold it. I think the state Senate's going to be a tie where Republicans will get to break the ties. And then when it comes down to Mississippi, Reeves by 5.2. I do have Beshear winning, sadly, but I would love to be proven wrong. So get out and vote if you live in Kentucky, Mississippi, Virginia, Ohio, or wherever. Doesn't exactly matter. There's always going to be important elections on the ballot. It is technically an off year, but it's still an election day. So make sure you guys do your part. Get out there and vote. I will not be streaming tomorrow, but you guys can follow along in the New York Times. I'll be here to cover it. When it's all said and done, we'll cover the results, and hopefully we can break this losing streak that we've had in these competitive races. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Like this video down below, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. The links are all in the description down below. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Red Eagle out.